Hello everyone and welcome to Privacy Chronicles podcast. It's our new episodes and we are very glad to welcome Tanya Chib here. Hello.
Hi.
Very nice to have you here. So our first questions from the very beginning, how are you? Can you tell us a bit about yourself and what is your role in privacy and AI governance?
Yes, of course. Thank you. So I am doing very well. It's almost the end of summer, and we still have some sunny days here in the Netherlands. So that always impacts the mood positively. And myself, now I've been in the Netherlands for the last 8 years. I have been working as a privacy consultant for the last 1.5 years. And before that, I was supporting large enterprises in really implementing GDPR and also complying, of course, with data protection regulations all over the world, including in Europe. And then eventually, with the advent of AI, I was at Philips where I already started working a little bit with understanding how can we make responsible AI, what are the consequences of actually working with AI and collecting large amounts of data and data sets. So that has been a little bit of my journey in privacy and AI.
Okay, so you started in privacy and then switched to AI, right?
So no, it's both. I am doing both at the moment. So privacy is my first love. I come from a country, India, which actually does not have a lot of concept of privacy. But I realized when I came to the Netherlands for my master's that actually this is a very interesting topic where people can have a right where their personal information is respected. We don't have that in India because everybody shares everything with everyone, and that is the norm. So I did a little bit more research into this, and I was like, yeah, actually, this resonates a lot with me. It's nice to have some rights over your personal information. And then I did my thesis on it, and that's how I got into the world of privacy. And then when I started, I was supporting a lot of digital projects back in Danone. And of course, that was when AI was really starting to become commercial and be available more widely. And then we saw how closely it is connected to personal data and how actually you can make your life a lot simpler. And maybe we'll talk about this later. If you're following privacy laws, you can make your AI system a lot more user friendly in the front of it and also at the back end on how you are actually using their data. So that's when I started working more closely with the AI engineers, and I realized that there is a value addition over here with your background in privacy. And then later on in Philips also, I was working on a lot of AI initiatives because Philips also works now mainly in health, and it makes a lot of lots of products which leverage AI technology. And yeah, so that has now slowly I made my way into AI through that. And I feel like it's such an amazing technology where we can benefit so much from and maximize so much of its potential. But if we can just be careful about certain things, such as how we use people's personal data, it will make our life and a lot easier for privacy professionals, but also as people who are putting out AI into the market.
Well, actually, it's an interesting conversation that you touched because, putting things on the market and protecting privacy is like a challenge for its own. And to address this challenge, you usually need some framework or benchmark or anything of the kind. So from your experience working in Philips, working independently, studying, comparing the two legal systems that you encountered and worked with in your life, how do you see the AI governance system at all? Who are the main users? What are the best concepts to be applied? Just tell me a little bit about, philosophy thing.
Yeah, no, great question. So how I see AI governance is really like how we had seat belts for cars. First there were cars and there were no seat belts, and we realized, okay, with a small change in the car and how it works and how the user is using it, we can make a huge change in the impact to the user by making it secure, more safe and more secure for the user. So that's how I see AI governance. It's just of course, you can go ahead with the technology, and we must and we should leverage it as much. But if we can put some guardrails to make sure that the harm from it is minimized and the profit is actually maximized, because we don't want to also develop a technology, I'm guessing, which is, while on one side has amazing potential, but then on the other side ends up discriminating against some people. I think nobody wants to build such technology. We want technology which will help everyone. So just AI governance is a set of rules or procedures or standards which you would not take into account maybe as a technical person, because you really want to create a product, an engineering marvel. But then another set of people can bring in another perspective that, okay, sure, while you are doing this, have you considered aspect about fairness? Have you considered an aspect about respecting people's privacy, because we are using so much data? So I just think, so that's how I see it, as sets of rules which can be brought out, which can be applied to building a product which is more holistic and wholesome.
Do you see it as, just one last question, do you see it as like, one act only, or maybe some system of codes of conduct, or maybe just, let the guys negotiate between themselves and decide for us how better they can serve our rights? How do you think, what is the best approach? Well, lawyer-wise.
Yeah. So we didn't really have a legislation on AI governance, right? So now we finally, with the EU AI Act, we have some sort of guidance, but in terms of how to really practically implement it, maybe still not so much. So now we have the new AI governance. NIST has taken out a new risk framework, which is very useful. I am really fond of the 42001 ISO standard, which is actually also quite practical to implement. So we're getting these kinds of codes which are useful to implement. But in my opinion, these are all helpful to have in front of you, but then you can tailor this to your own organization, to your own AI system, and see what are the risks that will apply to you, and then what will be the best controls for yourself. So these are very good guidance documents, and of course ISO standard is, if you can comply with it and follow it, it is excellent. But I use them more for seeing, so not maybe adopting them completely, but really seeing what fits more appropriately in your organization, depending on your product. So that is more for the practical terms, when I mentioned that how do you practically implement it in your organization. I see them as guiding documents.
A kind of shopping list.
Yes.
Okay, Anton, you wanted to ask something.
Yeah, so a great example about seat belts in the cars, because you can you may not use them, but in this case there may be some consequences and not very good. So that this new technology came, and now we have to actually go on and think something of how to make it safe and so on. On the other hand, like privacy boom, was earlier than AI boom. But AI is a smashing technology that actually empowers everything. And for sure, this implementation, as you said, needs to be done in a smart way, and those measures may have to be in customized format. But how do you think? What approaches from best privacy practices like privacy regulations and so on can be used here in AI governance? For example, like privacy by default, by design, and all that stuff. Maybe some features from your practice you can share with our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. So I see a huge overlap between, at least to reduce the privacy risk in AI, there's a huge overlap of best practices. So simply, even without complicating it too much, if we are following the principle of transparency as given in the GDPR, which is really informing your users how their data is going to be used, what data is collected, if you're using data to train algorithms, informing them, having a clear legal basis, being really clear about your entire data pipeline. So where is the data coming from? How long are we going to store it? Who is going to access it? And then being able to be in a place where you can transparently share this with your users. So this, just the transparency in itself, explaining it to your users in a way that actually you meet them where they are, so you don't complicate it too much, and you give them accessible explanations. This is a great best practice to follow also in the case of AI, which comes from the GDPR, to make sure privacy policies are easily available, accessible and completely fairly transparently, where you've explained the whole use. The principle of data minimization, for example, that do I need all of this data to train my algorithm, or can I work with lesser? Really questioning yourself, do I really need this data to train the algorithm, is super useful. To use that same criticality when training AI, which comes from the GDPR. In terms of how long do we want to store data? So the data retention requirement, which also comes from the GDPR. Do I really need to store all of this? Can I delete it? Can I anonymize it using privacy enhancing technologies such as anonymization to train data sets, maybe using synthetic data? So all of these are such amazing foundations that the GDPR has given us, which has now already been 6 years since the GDPR came out. So ideally, you would expect a company should be in a place where we can already have these processes, and we can just adopt them into our AI development and deployment. And then conducting a data protection impact assessment is super useful. Also, same for an AI system. What else? Like if you are sending data across the pond, of course, or you're sending data to any other jurisdiction, do you have measures in place which will guarantee that data the same amount of protection? So there is a lot that we can actually borrow from GDPR, which will really help in our AI governance eventually. And I always tell my clients that this is a really solid foundation. If you have built this, then you can really build a very strong building on top of it for your AI governance. But this foundation is absolutely necessary. Without this, your AI house will never be strong enough to sustain it. So this really is perfect in the way it came out for us as with GDPR, giving us a good amount of time before we have the AI house to build on top of that.
Yeah, thank you for such an answer. I think it's really true because, like, from the user's perspective, I want to know, okay, you got the AI. What actually do you do with my data using AI? Yeah, and
Yeah.
GDPR has all that stuff like automated made decisions, profiling stuff, and so on. So I expect as a user that companies will tell me clearly what is happening there in a black box. Not
Yeah.
just how we put your information here. Now you will see these advertisements till you dead. No,
Yeah.
just I want to know why so,
Yeah,
and so
and
on.
can I opt out of it maybe also? Is it possible? Do you give me if you want to train my data, okay, first let me know that you want to do that, and maybe give me an option to opt out, which the GDPR also provides. Which so all these great ideas were introduced there, which we can definitely leverage in our AI governance implementation.
Yes, but I think pets are the way actually to move on with this because synthetic
Yeah,
data, diversified privacy, all that noise and all that stuff, it's really
yeah,
helpful because
yeah,
once you
absolutely.
put just the clear personal data into AI, well, once you trained your like model, it's really hard to get the personal data out of it, and it can be a real
Exactly.
problem.
Yeah, just maybe it's not like a problem, maybe it's a feature, instead, because if you are a company and you amassed this kind of warehouse full of data, for example, you're collecting it long and you are doing it quite obscure, there is somewhere in the data lake something retains, and you understand that, well, if we are doing all the GDPR compliance hustle, maybe we will monetize the stuff that we already have.
Yeah,
Maybe we will just, make one step ahead. We've just assumed that, for example, it's a legitimate interest of our company to use all this data to make even better services for our clients, make it even more individual and more personal. So we all understand that at some point, any software as a service company that is working with customers like end users, they understand that they have a lot of data just laying,
yeah,
not really used except for servicing. Maybe we should put it to work if we are to to store them and pay for their storage. Maybe we can, just like banks do with money, maybe we can use them once more to generate a little bit more profit, for example. So if a company decides to do so, is it even legal? Or can you make it legal? How do you think?
yeah. Interesting question, and I'm sure this is relevant for a lot of organizations because it's on the mind or it has already been put to use. So then the question is, how can we make it legal? So the first question that comes to my mind is, okay, so if you would like to use this data, and what I would always advise is there a possibility to use it anonymously? Can we remove all the personal identifiers with it? And is the data still useful for you for your purpose of developing an AI? So that is the first question. And if not, what do we exactly really need to train the algorithm? So being really clear on what is our purpose and what do we exactly need. So not seeing the data. A lot of companies do that. You see the data and then you say, okay, with this, what can we really make? How can we put this to use? I would challenge to instead have an aim and then see what you need, and maybe, if possible, to use that in an anonymous way, because we don't really need personal information for we don't need to know who a person is to be able to train an algorithm. So maybe starting firstly with the question of, can we work with anonymous data? If not, then what is the other legal basis that we can rely on? Because you will need a legal basis under the GDPR if you're going to process that data. You may have collected this data for another service, for providing a service. So it was not initially collected to train an AI. So we cannot now automatically put it to that use. If we want to use it in that way, we have to either go back and take consent and ask our users if we can use their data like that. And if that is not an option, then we might have to find another legal basis under the GDPR. Maybe you want to rely, maybe legitimate interest is an option, but then we need to carry out a legitimate interest assessment, and you balance the organization's interest with those of the users and make sure that the users this is within the reasonable expectation, there are safeguards in place, and then perhaps we might be able to be in a place where we can actually use this data. And then the next question is, how do we ensure that this data is only used for that specific purpose and not for then other AI initiatives that we want? So that would be the third step of making sure then that if the legal basis is connected to this purpose, it is really justified. And then we have taken the step of informing the users. This is all if we are not using, of course, anonymous data, because then this will all not apply. And then how do we clearly communicate to the users? Do we give them, as we were just saying, an option to opt out? Maybe they can say, no, we don't want our data to be trained, and that should also be presented to the users. So I think having controls like this could facilitate using this data in the right way, but then these steps have to be taken. Otherwise, it's just not fair play. And I don't think you want that kind of a reputation in the market at all.
I am just thinking, because, it's interesting for me from the economic point of view, because GDPR costs money. It's like, it's not usually a profitable thing. It's usually something that you have to spare for and spend, just go on with that. So it is like a huge incentive to use it again, to train, for example, some model, and say everything will be okay. It's just your personal model deployed on your personal part of cloud. It's only serving you and nobody else. And it's kind of hard to monitor and supervise, because you are not here when they're training this data. You don't see the model, for example. You don't see the GitHub repository. You don't have the skill to understand whether it is okay or not. So it's kind of a tricky question, I believe, for all of us privacy professionals.
Yeah,
Right.
okay, so go into Black Mirror and we have to stop it at least
Hopefully
a bit.
not. Hopefully not.
Okay, and talking about roles of going to that Black Mirror stage, so we have in privacy this DPO role, we have a privacy manager role, and many people don't understand actually the difference. Yeah, oh, you do privacy, you're DPO. Like, okay,
Yeah.
good, let's go on. And so when we talk about this role of data protection officer and the role of AI governance officer or AI governance manager,
Yeah.
how do you think, are those roles similar or not? And may one person in one company sit on two chairs, like be the one and be the second one?
Yeah, I think that question is now going around quite a lot, and I understand it is in the interest of organizations perhaps to have one role. So one less salary to give. So that's always more economical. But I have my doubts also from the GDPR, because the GDPR does require a certain amount of independence of the DPO, because you report directly to the senior management and you needed to have some independence to carry out your role in a proper manner. And I feel if you are also the AI governance officer, governance lead, where you might be more in charge of implementing processes, So then to be the same person who is monitoring those processes and implementing those processes might lose your independence. So that is something that we need to look out for, of how do we ensure that that is not the case, where the person implementing is not the person monitoring. So we don't want to hamper the independence of the DPO. And of course, as in terms of skills, these days you see privacy professionals are gaining all sorts of certifications. So of course, while the scope of the AI governance officer, I feel, will be extended to more than just privacy and data protection, it will also include more about, it'll be more technical, more organizational, ethical aspects. So there is a gap of skill, but of course that can be bridged if you have the right amount of trainings and certifications. But more than that, I am concerned about, because that I have no doubt that the DPO or the privacy professional can manage. But what I have seen in my experience is that the DPO is already quite heavy with workload. The DPO office, usually it's not really well resourced in very often. There's a small team, and then if the DPO also you have all departments in the company within your scope, right? From HR, marketing to the digital team. So it's quite a large scope. And then to supervise that along with AI development and deployment might, in my opinion, may result in hampering the quality of the work that is then given out. So maybe for me personally, for best interest of both roles, so that both roles can be carried out with a certain amount of quality and where you can rely that the work being done is truly expertised, is to have two different personnel for that. But I can imagine if companies want to be more economical, or maybe are in the more initial stages of their AI development, smaller enterprises, more initial stages of their AI development, can perhaps have a person who is carrying out both roles, but then to really make sure that the implementation is not directly done by the same person who is monitoring.
Yeah, I think it's a great point of maybe not advice, but thought. Yeah, that if the one is if AI governor is the one who pushes AI in a company, he cannot or she cannot be a DPO because it's usually just
Exactly.
a clear
Exactly.
conflict
Yeah.
of interest. Yeah.
Yeah.
Kate?
So, Phil, we covered a range of topics. We talked about AI governance, talked about privacy a lot because they are like quite linked. So can we make any lessons out of that? For example, go after this podcast episode with a checklist of what you should do first, second, third, and so on, up to 5. For example, up to 5 lessons that we can bring with ourselves to our companies. For example, what shall we start with?
So I would advise to start with having a legal basis for your processing. So very basic. And so your processing is to develop an AI system. Sure, what is your legal basis? Can you, for your input data, what are you relying on? Or are you anonymizing the data altogether? That is a pre-processing step, which then you should also make sure that you have a legal basis for the anonymization step, but making sure you have a valid legal basis. That is step number 1 for me.
And that you can demonstrate it, in fact.
Yes. So we're also it's just taking a privacy first approach to your AI development. So we're really making sure. So with this, we can also, it depends on how easy we want to go on the companies, because we can, if we say privacy first approach, then that will also include, making sure that the input data that you're collecting is really the necessary amount of data that you need to train the model. You're not collecting more than you really need. So following data minimization. So with my clients, I club all of these, the GDPR approaches, into privacy first. And I say, okay, your legal basis, your data minimization, your storage limitation, all comes in taking a privacy first approach. Then second I would say, make sure, I think it's an easy one to carry out, and it's a low hanging fruit, is to make sure you can transparently explain the workings of your AI system to your users. And this should not be a very complicated or a very demanding task, in my opinion. So I would really recommend to meet the user where they are. Everybody does not need to know everything about AI, deep dive in the AI mechanics, but explain the user what is relevant for them, how your AI system is making decisions. So this would be the second, really, to have an explainable, transparent AI, which is as Anton also mentioned, you don't know, it's not just this black box, black mirror approach, but more where you can understand at least, will I get advertising till I die, or I have some more rights over here. So, yeah, the third one is now I coined the term ethical by design. So, again, including maybe starting this up simple with setting up an AI ethics committee in your company and really understanding how from development to deployment, where are we, what are our ethical risks, are we moving in line with societal expectations and standards and values. So to set up a company which is cross-functional, which has experts from your legal team, compliance team, technologists, and maybe ethicists, and then really to do a scoping. So we don't want to make sure that we want to ensure that we again do not have more issues of bias, of privacy, and in case there are any other measures which are unintended, which we can look into already. So that's why I think it's really useful to start with an ethical assessment. So having an ethical committee set up, which can set your norms, and from there moving forward. So that is ethical.
And remain privacy friendly, because a startup or a company is usually consists of some different people from different backgrounds, with different values oftentimes. So you have to ensure that everyone shares the culture, that we are doing things properly here. We are working with GDPR, understand the quality and the value of this of the task that is, this on us to comply with the laws. So, yes, ethics and privacy-friendly culture are very, very important in this regard.
Exactly. And it should not be so hard to implement. Because I at least I feel like this gives you such a big competitive edge. It's something that you can talk to your users about really proudly, which users will appreciate. And but so that's where I sometimes don't understand certain corporations, where I'm just like, what is more important at this stage? But that's why I'm a privacy professional and probably not a CEO or a technologist.
Sometimes you just want to say, just like, guys, don't overthink it, just let it go. It's an old database, you do not use it anymore, just let it go. Let it go in peace, please.
Exactly. In peace, exactly.
So there are 3 key lessons. 2 more.
And I think once we have these measures in place, so really privacy first approach, having transparency, explainable AI, and then including ethics in our development cycle, then we can really go in for more data and AI governance setup to really have best practices, policies, and procedures really around your AI. It doesn't have to be very complicated. You can also just have a red, yellow, green approach. This is really prohibited within the company. This is allowed. This is where you need to come for further permissions, and we need to apply some controls. So that's where the best practices around AI governance should also be set up. But this is, I know, quite complicated for most companies. So that's why I put it below the first 3, which are considered quite easy and critical to implement. And thereafter, once we have these basics in place, I think we're in a great place to then evolve to see how so far of our governance is functioning. And then you are monitoring it and evolving, doing the iterations of this model further. So the 5th would be really just to get user feedback, to see where you can make improvements and where you can simplify your tasks, because I don't want governance to also be something that is slowing down the company all the time. So if there are places where we can improve, we can automate things, we do that, we make it faster, and we iterate and make our governance of the entire AI process a lot better, faster, quicker.
It's beneficial that it's just so early stage, like it's no hard at all to monitor everything. You only have one act you have to read. You only have like a handful of organizations that are tasked with understanding, explaining AI regulation to the general public, One really knows how to standardize the thing and how to monitor and audit this thing as well. So you have a lot of space to make the solution as flexible and as useful to you as possible, while preserving users' privacy, of course.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your lesson. Thank you so much for sharing the expertise and making accents. It's important, sometimes go offline and understand, offline, from click out from your work and just, just to talk to your fellow privacy professional to understand that, well, you are not going mad. It's actually everyone else. We are perfectly okay.
Thank you so much. It was really nice to speak to both of you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the involvement. It was really great, and I think it will be a great episode. By the way, at Privacy City we don't have sponsors, but our first guest, Natalia Bityukova, today wrote me and told me that she has launched a service like Streamlex, and it's AI and privacy governance in one website, and it is very UX friendly. So she asked me to promote it, and I decided why not. Okay, so that's it. Okay, thank you very much, Tanya, for being with us, and I think we will be very grateful to share all those your thoughts with our listeners and tag you and all this. Thank you.
Thank you.